The bell tower chimed its ancient song as dawn broke over the stone walls of St. Magdalen's Abbey. I pulled my woolen habit closer against the morning chill, my bare feet silent against the cold flagstones as I made my way through the corridor. 3 years had passed since I first entered these hallowed halls as a novice, and still the weight of silence pressed upon my shoulders like a heavy cloak. My name is Sister Marguerite, though in the world beyond these walls I was once called Margaret of Ashford. At 19, I had taken my preliminary vows, believing with all my heart that God had called me to serve Him in this sacred place. The memories of my former life seemed distant. Now the laughter of my younger siblings, the warmth of my mother's embrace, the songs we sang during harvest time, all of that belonged to another soul, one who had willingly surrendered worldly pleasures for the promise of eternal salvation. The abbey sat nestled in a valley, surrounded by ancient oaks, their branches reaching toward heaven like gnarled hands in prayer. Beyond the walls stretched endless fields of grain that fed both our community and the nearby village. We were 23 sisters in total, ranging from elderly Mother Superior Agatha, who had served God for NAI on 50 years, to young Sister Catherine, who had arrived only months before. Our days followed the sacred rhythm of the divine office matins before dawn, lauds at sunrise, prime, terce, sext, none, vesper, and compline, to close each day in holy darkness. The scriptorium was my sanctuary. Within this sanctuary, there, surrounded by precious manuscripts and the sweet scent of parchment, I copied sacred texts with careful precision. My hand had grown steady over the years, my letters flowing like small prayers across the. Sister Beatrice, our librarian, often praised my illuminated capital, saying they rivaled those created in the great monasteries of the. On this particular morning, as I made my way to the chapel for law, something felt different. The very air seemed to hum with anticipation, though I could not fathom why. The familiar sounds of our community stirring to life echoed softly, the whisper of robes against stone, the gentle splash of water from the lavatorium, the soft chanting that drifted from the chapel like incense made audible. Mother Superior Agatha stood at the altar as we filed in, her weathered hands folded in prayer. She was a woman of few words, but infinite wisdom, her eyes holding depths that spoke of sorrows transformed into grace. As we took our places in the choir stalls, she raised her hand for my daughters. She spoke, her voice carrying clearly the stone chant. We are to receive visitors. Brothers from the monastery of St. Benedict shall join us for morning prayer, and will remain to assist with the harvest preparation. Let us remember that our vows of silence extend most especially to times when the sanctity of our community might be tested. A flutter of whispered prayers rose from the assembled. It had been more than a year since any from the outside world had entered our walls, save for the occasional merchant or messenger. The thought of male voices joining our morning chant sent an unfamiliar tremor through my chest. I quickly dismissed as mere curiosity. The great doors at the far end of the chapel creaked open, and 5 figures in brown robes entered. They moved with the measured pace of men accustomed to prayer, their heads bowed respectfully as they took their places in the nave. I found myself stealing glances at them during the Gloria, though I kept my eyes properly lowered for most of the service. One among them drew my attention, despite my efforts to remain focused on our prayers. He was tall and lean, with hair the color of autumn wheat that caught the morning light streaming through our stained glass windows. When he lifted his voice in the Kyrie eleison, the sound seemed to resonate in chambers of my heart I had forgotten existed. There was something in his bearing, a gentleness mixed with strength, that set him apart from his brothers. After the service concluded, Mother Superior approached the visitors, while we sisters filed out in our customary silence. I lingered near the holy water font, pretending to examine a chip in the stone basin while straining to hear their conversation. "Welcome, Brother Marcus," Mother Superior said to the tall monk who had captured my attention. "Your abbot wrote that you have experience with manuscript restoration. Sister Beatrice will be pleased to show you our collection." Brother Marcus, the name settled in my mind like a prayer half remembered. His voice, when he replied, was deep and melodious. "I am honored to, Reverend Mother. My brothers and I are grateful for your hospitality." As the group dispersed, our eyes met for just an instant. In that brief moment, I felt as though lightning had struck the very foundations of my faith. His eyes were the color of summer sky, and in them I saw a recognition that mirrored my own. Then Sister Catherine touched my arm, reminding me that we were late for our morning meal, and the moment passed like a half-remembered dream. The refectory buzzed with unusual energy that morning. Though all conversation remained properly subdued, we ate our simple breakfast of bread and weak ale, while Sister Agnes read from the lives of the saints, her voice competing with the sound of rain that had begun pattering against the windows. I found it impossible to concentrate on the holy words, my thoughts returning again and again to that moment of connection in the chapel. After breaking our fast, I made my way to the scriptorium, hoping that familiar work might settle my troubled mind. But when I pushed open the heavy wooden door, I found Brother Marcus already there, carefully examining one of our most precious manuscripts, a psalter decorated with gold leaf that had been damaged by water during the previous winter's storms. "Forgive me," I whispered, backing toward the door. "I did not know, double quotes, pray, do not leave on my account, sister," he said, looking up from his work. "Sister Beatrice told me thou art the finest illuminator in the abbey. Perhaps thou couldst assist me in determining which pigments were used for these marginalia." His use of the formal address sent a strange warmth through me. I approached cautiously, keeping proper distance as I examined the manuscript. Our heads bent over the parchment, and I caught the scent of his skin clean and somehow reminiscent of pine forests and morning air. "'Tis ultramarine from crushed lapis," I said softly, pointing to a blue initial that had partially flaked away. "And here, gold leaf over red bowl. The text is written in iron gall ink, which explains why it has survived the water damage better than the illumination. Thou hast a keen eye." And when he smiled, I felt my carefully constructed world shift on its foundation. At St. Benedict's, we have few manuscripts so finely wrought. 'Tis clear that great love went into their creation. Love. The word hung in the air between us like incense, carrying meanings I dared not examine too closely. I busied myself with organizing the pigment, acutely aware of his presence just an arm's length away. "How long have you served God in this place?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years as a novice," I replied. "My final vows, I paused, the words catching in my throat. "My final vows are to be taken at Michaelmas, 6 weeks." The realization struck us both with the force of a physical blow. In 6 weeks, I would be wedged to Christ forever, bound by chains of prayer and obedience that no earthly power could break. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken understanding. "And thou?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. 10 years I have served," he said, his voice tinged with something that might have been regret. "I took my final vows when I was but 18, believing I had felt God's calling." He paused, studying the manuscript before him. "Sometimes I wonder if what I heard was merely the echo of my own fear of the world beyond the monastery walls." Such words bordered on blasphemy, yet I understood them too well. Had my own calling been true, or had I simply been fleeing the prospect of an arranged marriage to a man 3 times my... The questions I had buried beneath years of prayer and penance rose like spirits in the darkness. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside made us both start. I quickly moved to the far side of the room, taking up my usual place at the writing desk, while Brother Marcus returned his attention to the damaged psalter. Sister Beatrice entered, carrying an armful of bound volumes that needed copying. "Ah, Sister Marguerite, excellent. I have work for," she said, setting the books on my desk. "These are treatises on herb lore that must be copied before the Feast of All Saints. And Brother Marcus, how dost thou find our psalter?" "'Tis badly damaged, but not beyond repair," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "With proper attention, most of the illuminations can be restored." Sister Beatrice nodded approvingly. "Then ye shall work here each morning after law. Sister Marguerite can assist with questions about our scriptorium practice." She paused at the door, fixing us both with a sharp look that suggested she saw more than we might wish. "Remember that silence aids contemplation, and contemplation brings us closer to God." When she left, the weight of her unspoken warning settled over us like a shroud. Yet, as the days passed, we found ourselves drawn together by shared love of beautiful things, manuscripts, and music. The play of light through stained glass, the careful art of transforming plain parchment into something that could lift souls toward heaven. Our conversations, conducted in whispers between the scratch of my quill and the careful scraping of his restoration, revealed minds that thought in harmony. He spoke of philosophy and theology with an intelligence that challenged my own understanding. I shared my knowledge of plant lore and illumination technique, and he listened with an attention that made me feel as though my words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. On the morning of the Feast of the Assumption, as we worked side by side in the early light that streamed through the scriptorium windows, I made a mistake that changed everything. Reaching for a particular shade of blue, I knocked over a small pot of red oak. The pigment scattered across the psalter he was restoring, and I gasped in horror at what I had done. Oh, forgive me, I have ruined it. I reached desperately to brush away the powder, but he caught my hand in his to still my frantic movement. The moment our skin touched, time seemed to pass. His hand was warm and calloused from years of work, yet gentle as he held mine. Neither of us moved or spoke for what felt like an eternity, caught in that simple contact that violated every rule by which we had agreed to live. "'Tis not ruin," he whispered finally, his thumb tracing softly across my. See, the powder brushes away clean. But he did not release my, and I did not pull away. Instead, we sat frozen in that moment of connection, both knowing we stood at the edge of an abyss from which there might be no return. The sound of approaching footsteps shattered our trance. He released my hand as though it burned him, and I snatched it back to my chest, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain it could be heard throughout the abbey. We turned back to our work with desperate concentration as Sister Agnes entered the scriptorium. "Sister Marguerite," she said, her voice carrying an edge of suspicion, "Mother Superior wishes to see thee in her chambers immediately." Fear clutched at my throat as I followed Sister Agnes through the corridors. Had our moment been observed? Had someone reported the improper familiarity between Brother Marcus and myself? My hands trembled as I knocked upon Mother Superior's heavy oak door. "Enter, my child." Mother Superior Agatha sat behind her simple wooden desk, her weathered hands folded over an open volume of scripture. Her eyes, usually kind, seemed to pierce through to my very soul as I knelt before her. "Rise, Sister Marguerite, and sit." She gestured to a chair across from her desk. "We must speak of thy final vows, which approach with the changing." Relief flooded through me. This was merely about the ceremony, not about any improper behavior she might have witnessed. I composed myself as best I could, keeping my hands folded in my lap to hide their shaking. "Yes, Reverend Mother, I have been preparing through prayer and fasting, as ye instructed. And art thou certain in thy heart that this is God's will for thy life?" Her question seemed to look directly into those doubts I had tried so hard to suppress. Yes, Mother. I believe so." "Belief and certainty are not the same thing, child." She leaned back in her chair, studying my face with those sharp eyes that had seen countless souls struggle with their calling. "I have observed thee these past weeks. There is a restlessness in thee that was not there before our visitors arrived." My cheeks burned with shame. If Mother Superior had noticed my distraction, surely others had as well. "Forgive me, Mother. I know not why my prayers have seemed so scattered of late. Dost thou not?" Her voice was gentle but implacable. "Come now, Marguerite. I was young once, though it may seem impossible to thee now. I know what it is to feel the pull of the world beyond these walls, especially when that world takes the form of a handsome young monk with eyes the color of summer sky." My breath caught in my throat. She knew. Somehow, she had seen what I thought we had kept hidden. "Mother, I swear to thee, nothing improper has child. I do not accuse thee of wrongdoing, but I would be failing in my duty if I did not address what I see before it grows beyond thy ability to control." She rose and moved to the window that looked out over the abbey garden. "Tell me truly, when thou dost think of taking thy final vows, what dost thou feel?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. I had asked myself the same thing countless times in recent days, and each time the answer had grown more difficult to bear. I feel ... I struggle to find words for the turmoil in my heart. I feel as though I am about to close a door that, once shut, can never be opened again. "And dost thou wish to close that door?" Tears began to flow, despite my efforts to. "I know not, Mother. I thought I did. For 3 years I believed with all my heart that God had called me to this life. But now, Double quotes. But now, thou hast glimpsed what lies beyond that door, and thy heart is divided. She returned to her seat, her expression more compassionate than condemning. Child, there is no shame in acknowledging doubt. Even our Lord struggled with his calling in the Garden of Gethsemane. What am I to do, mother? I have given my word, made promises before God and this community. Preliminary vows can be dissolved if thy calling proves false. Better to discover this now than to bind thyself with final vows while harboring such uncertainty. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I am going to send thee away for a time. Away. The word struck me like a physical blow. To the convent of St. Clare, 20 miles hence. Their Mother Superior is an old friend, and they have need of someone skilled in illumination. Thou wilt spend the weeks until Michaelmas there, in prayer and contemplation, removed from distraction. When thou dost return, thou wilt know with certainty whether thy calling is. The wisdom of her decision was evident, yet my heart rebelled against it. To leave now, when whatever was growing between Brother Marcus and myself had barely begun to flower. But I could hardly voice such objections without confirming her suspicion. When am I to leave, mother? On the morrow, after prime? Pack only what thou needst for the journey. Sister Catherine will accompany thee for propriety's. She stood, indicating our conversation was at an end. Use this time well, child. Search thy heart honestly, and let God guide thee to the truth of thy calling. I spent that evening in the chapel, kneeling before the altar, while my sisters chanted Compline around me. The familiar words that had once brought such comfort now seemed to mock my confusion. How had I allowed myself to become so entangled in earthly desires? How had one man's touch shattered the certainty I had built over 3 years of faithful service? Yet, even as I prayed for strength to overcome my weakness, I found myself reliving that moment when Brother Marcus had held my hand. The warmth of his skin, the gentleness of his touch, the way time itself seemed to pause. Was it truly sin to long for such connection, or was it simply the natural cry of a heart created for love? After the service ended and my sisters had retired to their cells, I remained in the chapel, wrestling with questions that had no easy answer. The candles burned low, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls, and I must have dozed in my prayers, for I woke to find someone kneeling beside me. Brother Marcus. His presence in the chapel at such an hour was highly irregular, yet I felt no surprise at seeing him there. It was as though my heart had called to his across the silent corridors of the abbey. I heard thou art to leave on the morrow, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the night sounds of settling stone and distant wind. Mother Superior believes I need time away from distraction. I could not look at him directly, afraid of what I might see in his eyes. And what dost thou believe? The simple question cut through all my confusion like a blade. What did I believe? Not what I should believe, or what was proper to believe, but what my heart knew to be. I believe, I whispered, that in 20 years of life, I have never felt more alive than in these past. Working beside thee in the scriptorium, he was quiet for so long that I feared I had shocked him with my boldness. When he finally spoke, his words confirmed my worst fears and greatest hopes, and I believe that 10 years of faithful service to God have not prepared me for the chaos thou hast brought to my soul. We knelt there, in the candlelit darkness, 2 souls balanced on the precipice between duty and desire. The enormity of what lay between the vows we had taken, the communities that depended on us, the God we had pledged to serve, seemed insurmountable. Yet in that moment, none of it mattered as much as the simple truth that we had found in each other something we had not even known we were seeking. What are we to do? I asked, voicing the question that had tormented me since that first moment our eyes had met. I know not, he admitted, but I cannot let thee leave without telling thee, double quotes. He paused, struggling with words that should never be spoken between religious, without telling thee that thou hast become more precious to me than my own salvation. The confession hung between us like a blasphemy and a benediction combined. I knew I should flee, should run to my cell and pray for strength to overcome such sinful thoughts. Instead, I turned to face him fully, seeing in the flickering candlelight the same anguish that tore at my own heart. And thou hast shown me that there are forms of worship I never knew existed, I whispered back. ways of serving God through loving one of his creatures so completely that every breath becomes a prayer of gratitude. He reached out then, his fingers barely brushing my cheek, and I leaned into that touch as though it were absolution itself. We were both weeping for the impossibility of our situation, for the cruel timing that had brought us together, only to tear us apart, for the choices we would have to make that would satisfy neither heart nor heaven. "If thou dost decide thy calling lies elsewhere," he said softly, "I will find thee, somehow, somewhere. I will find thee, and we will build a life that honors both God and the love he has placed between. And if I choose to take my final vows, then I will pray for the strength to love thee from afar, and to find in that sacrifice a form of devotion worthy of the gift thou hast given me." The distant sound of the bell tower chiming matins reminded us both of how little time remained. In a few hours I would leave this place, and the choice would be made, not today, perhaps, but inevitably. I memorized every detail of his face in the candlelight, storing up images to sustain me through whatever lay ahead. "I must go," I whispered, though every fiber of my being rebelled against the words. "As must I." He stood and helped me to my feet, his hand lingering in mine for one final moment. "Whatever thou dost, know that thou hast given me a glimpse of heaven that no amount of prayer could provide." We parted there in the chapel, he returning to the guest quarters, and I to my cell. I lay awake until dawn, alternately praying and weeping, my heart torn between the life I had planned and the life I had never dared to. The morning came too soon, and not soon enough. I packed my few belongings, extra shifts, writing implement, the small psalter I had illuminated during my first year while Sister Catherine chatted nervously about the journey ahead. She had been told only that I needed time for spiritual reflection before taking final vows, and her excitement about visiting another convent was infectious despite my heavy heart. At prime, I took my usual place in the choir stalls, but found it impossible to concentrate on the prayers. Brother Marcus stood with his fellow monks in the nave, and though I kept my eyes properly lowered, I felt his gaze upon me like a physical touch. When the service ended and we filed out, our eyes met one final time. In that look, I saw a promise that gave me both hope and terror in equal measure. The wagon that would carry Sister Catherine and me to St. Clair's waited in the courtyard. Mother Superior blessed our journey, while the community gathered to see us off. As we pulled away from the only home I had known for 3 years, I looked back to see Brother Marcus standing in the doorway of the scriptorium, watching until we disappeared around the bend in the road. St. Clair's was smaller than our abbey, housing only 12 sisters, but their welcome was warm, despite their surprise at our arrival. Mother Agnes, their superior, was indeed an old friend of Mother Agatha, and she seemed to understand without explanation why I had been sent to them. My cell was simple but comfortable, with a small window that looked out over apple orchards heavy with fruit ready for harvest. For the first week, I threw myself into prayer and work with desperate intensity, copying texts and illuminating manuscripts as though such activity could burn away the longing that But as the days passed and autumn settled over the countryside, I found myself thinking not of my calling to religious life, but of what Brother Marcus had said about finding me if I chose differently. The sisters at St. Clair's were kind, and their life together seemed filled with a joy that I realized had been missing from my own experience at St. Magdalene's. They laughed during their work, sang while they cooked, and seemed to find genuine pleasure in their service to God. Mother Agnes, in particular, radiated a contentment that spoke of a calling truly answered. "Thou art troubled, child," she observed one evening as we worked together in the herb garden, harvesting late-blooming flowers for the infirmary. "Dost thou wish to speak of what burdens thy heart?" Under the gentle pressure of her question, the whole story poured out my doubts about my calling, my growing feelings for Brother Marcus, the impossible choice that lay before me. She listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that helped me see my situation more clearly. "And what dost thou believe God desires for thy life?" she asked when I had finished. "I thought I knew," I admitted. "For 3 years, I was certain that he called me to the religious life. But now, now thou hast discovered that God's plans for us are sometimes different from our own understanding." She smiled, her weathered hands gentle as she tended the plants around us. "Tell me, when thou dost pray now, what dost thou feel?" I considered the question carefully. Confusion, mostly, and a sense that I am trying to force myself into a path that no longer fit. And when thou dost think of this young monk, heat flooded my cheek, but I answered honestly, joy, a sense of rightness that I have never felt about anything else in my life. Mother Agnes nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes, God speaks to us not through grand visions or mystical experience, but through the quiet certainty of our hearts when they recognize what is truly meant for them. She paused in her work, studying my face in the fading light. I have served God in this place for 30 years, and I can tell thee with confidence that He does not desire our misery. If thy heart has found its home in another soul, perhaps that too is part of His plan. Her words were like a key turning in a lock I had not even realized existed. For the first time since leaving St. Magdalene's, I felt the tight knot of guilt and confusion in my chest begin to loosen. Over the remaining weeks of my stay, I prayed with new purpose, not asking God to help me suppress my feelings, but asking Him to show me clearly what path He truly desired for my life. The answer came not in a moment of revelation, but in a gradual growing certainty that settled over me like dawn breaking slowly over the horizon. I loved Brother Marcus, but more than that, I loved the person I became when I was with him. In his presence, I felt complete in a way that years of religious devotion had never achieved. The thought of spending my life serving God alongside a man who challenged my mind and cherished my heart filled me with a joy that felt sacred in its intensity. The feast of Michaelmas approached with autumn's golden glory, painting the countryside in shades of fire. Sister Catherine and I prepared to return to St. Magdalene, and I knew with absolute certainty what choice I would make. The preliminary vows that had once seemed like sacred bonds now felt like chains I was finally strong enough to break. Our return journey was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Sister Catherine had clearly enjoyed our time away and seemed genuinely sorry to be leaving the cheerful community at St. Clair. I, meanwhile, felt my heart racing with each mile that brought us closer to home and to Brother Marcus. Would he still be there? Mother Superior had mentioned that the brothers from St. Benedict's would remain only through harvest, and that season was nearly ended. The possibility that he might already have returned to his monastery filled me with panic. How would I find him if he had gone? How would I tell him of my decision? St. Magdalene's appeared around the familiar bend in the road, its stone walls golden in the afternoon sun. Nothing had changed in our absence, yet everything felt different to my eyes. This place, that had been my refuge for 3 years now, seemed like a cage from which I was finally ready to fly. Mother Superior met us in the courtyard, her sharp eyes taking in my composed demeanor with obvious surprise. I had left as a confused and anguished young woman. I returned with the calm certainty of someone who had found her true path at last. "Welcome home, my daughters," she said, embracing us both. "I trust thy time away was profitable, Sister Marguerite." "Yes, Reverend Mother, very profitable." She studied my face for a long moment, and I saw understanding dawn in her eyes. "Ah, I see. Well then, come to my chambers after Vesper. We have much to discuss." The service that evening felt like a farewell. Though I sang the familiar psalms with more heart than I had in months, my sisters' voices rose around me in harmonies I had always loved, and I felt a bittersweet gratitude for the years I had spent among them. They had given me shelter when I needed it, taught me skills that would serve me wherever life took, and shown me forms of devotion that would always be part of who I was. But they were not my future. Brother Marcus was not among the monks in the nave, and my heart sank with disappointment. Had he already departed? Had he given up hope of seeing me again? I tried to concentrate on the prayers, but my thoughts kept racing ahead to the conversation I would have with Mother Superior and the uncertain future that lay beyond it. After the service, I made my way to Mother Superior's chambers with steps that felt both heavy with sorrow and light with anticipated freedom. She was waiting for me, a pot of herb tea steaming on her desk and 2 cups prepared. The domestic gesture was so unlike her usual formality that it brought tears to my eyes. "Sit, child," she said gently, pouring tea for both of us, "and tell me what thy time at St. Clair's has revealed. I cannot take my final vows." "Mother." The words came out in a rush, as though speaking them quickly would make them easier to bear. "I have prayed and searched my heart, and I know with certainty that God has not called me to the religious life. She nodded, showing no surprise at my announcement. And what has he called thee to instead? To love, to marriage, to building a life with the man he has placed in my path. I met her eyes directly, no longer ashamed of my choice. I know it seems like betrayal of everything I have worked toward here, but I feel more certain of this than I have ever felt of anything. It is not betrayal to acknowledge when our understanding of God's will has changed, she said softly. I suspected this would be thy decision when I sent thee away. Thou hast always had a heart too large and generous to be contained within these walls forever. Relief flooded through me at her acceptance. I had feared anger, disappointment, accusations of weakness or faithlessness. Instead, I found only understanding and, perhaps, a touch of maternal pride. What of Brother Marcus? I asked, hardly daring to voice the question that mattered most. Has he, ... is he still here? A smile played at the corners of Mother Superior's mouth. He is, in fact. He has spoken to his abbot about his own doubts regarding his calling. It seems thy time away was equally profitable for both of you, though in different ways. My heart leaped with hope and gratitude. He had not abandoned our love while I was gone. Instead, he had been wrestling with the same impossible choice and had reached the same conclusion. Where is he now? In the scriptorium, I believe, working late on that Psalter restoration, though I suspect his mind is on other matters. She stood, moving to a chest in the corner of her chamber and withdrawing several items. Before thou dost go to him, there are practical matters to address. She handed me a small leather purse and a sealed letter. Thy dowry returned to thee, and a letter of recommendation for thy service here. Thou wilt need both, as thou dost begin thy new life. She paused, her expression growing more serious. I have spoken with the bishop regarding thy preliminary vows. They can be formally dissolved, but the process will take time. Until then, thou art still bound by them, as is Brother Marcus by his. I trust I need not explain what this means regarding proper conduct. Heat rose in my cheeks as I understood her meaning. Even in choosing love over duty, we would need to wait before we could fully express that love. Yes, Mother, I understand. Good, now go. I suspect there is someone anxious to hear of thy decision. The corridors of the abbey seemed different as I walked toward the scriptorium, not smaller or confining, but simply no longer mine to claim. I was a visitor now in this place that had been my home, a guest preparing to take my leave. The realization was both sad and liberating. Light spilled from beneath the scriptorium door, and I could hear the soft scratch of quill on parchment within. I stood for a moment with my hand on the iron latch, gathering courage for what might be the most important conversation of my life. Then I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Brother Marcus looked up from his work, and the expression that crossed his face when he saw me was worth every moment of uncertainty I had endured. Joy, relief, hope, and love combined in a look that spoke more eloquently than any word. Thou hast returned, he said, setting down his quill and rising from his chair. I have. I moved toward him slowly, drinking in the sight of him after weeks of separation. And I have made my choice. As have I. He met me halfway across the room, stopping just far enough away to maintain propriety, while close enough that I could see the hope blazing in his summer sky eyes. My abbot was surprised by my request to be released from my final vows, but not entirely unsympathetic. He has agreed to begin the process. Mother Superior has done the same for me. I felt tears of relief and joy streaming down my cheeks. We will be free to marry, though it may take time. Time I am willing to spend. If thou art? He reached out as though to touch my face, then caught himself and let his hand fall back to his side. I have thought of nothing but thee these weeks past, of the life we might build together, the children we might raise, the years of growing old side by side. It seems too wonderful. It is real, I whispered. As real as this love that has turned both our worlds upside down. We stood there drinking in each other's presence, both acutely aware of the restrictions that still bound us, yet giddy with the knowledge that they were temporary. Soon, not tomorrow, perhaps, but soon we would be free to touch, to embrace, to begin the life together that we had chosen over duty to any earthly institution. What will we do now? I asked. Where will we go when we are released from our vows? I have been thinking about that, he said, his voice growing warm with plans. And there is a village, some 50 miles north of here, that has need of a teacher for their children. The priest there is old and would welcome assistant his duties. We could be useful there, thou with thy skills in herb lore and illumination, and I with my learning. We could serve God together, as husband and wife, rather than as monk and nun. The picture he painted filled me with longing so intense it was almost painful.